Welcome back to another TapRooT Podcast. This week I'm joined by Mark and Ken, and we're going to be talking about what a world-class investigation looks like. Now, we know what a TapRooT investigation looks like.
There you go. What more do you need to say?
I think we're done. Yeah.
But I think helping people understand what goes into a world-class investigation and really what's the difference between maybe what they think is a good enough investigation and what really makes an investigation stand out. So I think that's a good starting point. Mark, to you, what makes a good investigation?
Well, boy, you had a mouthful there of things. And I think the first thing, before you can have world-class or even good, is you have to have management support for doing a world-class investigation, which means management supports you in your selection of root cause analysis tools you're going to use. Management supports you with enough time and resources and people to do good investigations. You're not doing these in your spare time.
They're well-trained people that they've supported you with.
You've got training on what to do and software to use and all that kind of support stuff. And then management is interested in getting a good investigation. And they're not interested in just, let's get this done and get back to production, or, hey, as long as you say the guy was at fault, that's good. Those kinds of things have to happen first. If they don't, all the rest after that can't happen.
And this has to be in place before you are ready to do your investigation. These aren't things that you just decide this is something really bad happened. Let's make sure we make this a good investigation.
Yeah, somebody got hurt this morning.
Let's make this a world-class investigation, right?
You can't normally do bad investigations and all of a sudden turn around and do good investigations.
Right. This is all
you get in
planning.
a habit and you get, this is the way we're going to do this, and all of a sudden you say, oh no, this is an important investigation, do it right this time. That's not going to work.
Right. So all of these things that Mark just mentioned are your prerequisites. These are things that have to be in place from the beginning before you can even start these good investigations.
But we've seen that with people before, that they might have a really severe incident. Maybe they've got a fatality or a really severe injury, and management's now breathing down their necks to really do a good investigation.
Now management's interested, right?
Yeah.
No, they're not. That's wrong. What management is getting this covered up and getting on. If we've always been doing bad and we've been promoting you to do bad, they're not going to say, oh yeah, find all the management system root causes in this one and tell me what they are. They're not going to do that. They're going to help you blame somebody, and we'll fire somebody, and we'll get on with life.
I do think there is some organizations, though, that maybe they have not experienced a major investigation in a very long time, or maybe ever in their organization. They've only had little things, cut hands, fingers, trips, things like that. So they have zero experience in a major investigation. And we have clients like that call us up and ask for facilitations when they do have a major, because they know that they don't have that experience, training, and knowledge to do a major investigation. But they do want to do it right. So I think in some cases, maybe you got to meet a company where it's at in that case.
It would be interesting to see the statistics and how many first-time fatalities there are compared to a series of fatalities there are. And see, is it more likely if you've been a company that's never had a fatality to have a fatality, or is it more likely if you've had multiple fatalities in the past, you'll have fatalities again in the future?
I think it is. There's going to be both, because you're going to have new companies that came in that didn't put in place good processes that ended up in fatalities, and you have old companies that have systemic weaknesses that have resulted in fatalities.
So let's agree then that anybody with a fatality probably has a far way to go to improve their root cause system because they weren't solving problems before the fatality happened.
Yeah. So step one, you have to have the management support, and that comes with methodology, training, resources, time. I know time is a big one for making the difference between what we might classify as world-class and an ordinary investigation. A lot of companies put really tight timelines. Do you think that makes a difference between getting to a world-class investigation? Like, can you do a world-class investigation fast?
Well, I think I think time sometimes is a red herring. I don't think that, I think people equate world class with long and hard. It's got to be long and difficult, and therefore it must be world class. The timing on that, I think, is important. I have no problem with a company putting timelines on things and putting deadlines and saying, hey, you must have something to me within a certain amount of time. I don't mind having some kind of a broad policy in place or something like that that gives you some kind of a timeline that you should be following. But I think it needs to be flexible, and so that somebody can say, hey, I know my timeline here says I need to have the report out in a week, but it's going to take me a week and a half. Is that okay? And management's going to say, well, they can't just say yes. You've got to be able to structure it a little bit. Not necessarily to the point where you must have it completed in a certain amount of time, but that you have milestones that are completed.
Yeah, I think milestones is where it's at. That's what we kind of coach on. Is it's not about how fast you get it completed, but it's management wants that timeline because they want to see that you're making progress and you're not letting it evidence and information disappear. Right. So having a deadline for maybe an initial SnapCharT that says what we know right now and what evidence we need to gather. That's the thing where having a timeline is probably reasonable, a time parameter. Right. But saying, oh, well, that's just going to equal I'll be done in a week. Right. Well, that may be dependent on what you have to collect.
I also go in the other direction. I don't like when there are no timelines because then it just kind of disappears. It never finishes. And I've heard people tell me that their requirement is I have to have a final report out within 2 months. And I'm thinking, 2 months? Oh my goodness.
You've forgotten it all by then.
2 months is a long time. And now if you have to wait for chemical analyses or some kind of weird thing that you had to send off and get back from a laboratory, okay, there's some stuff in there that's going to take a while. But there is no reason that almost any investigation, unless you had a rig go down in the middle of the ocean or something, there's most investigations.
That takes 5 years.
That does take some time.
No, I'm talking about the CSB investigation.
Yeah.
Not Texas City. It was Deepwater Horizon.
Deepwater Horizon. Yeah.
And I can't remember how many years it took for them to come up. 3, 5, something like that. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. There were some mitigating circumstances. They had to sue somebody to get evidence, and that had to go to court, and they won, and they got the evidence. But I'm still not sure they shouldn't have come up with an interim report on everything except what we were suing for.
90%.
They just released the finalized report for the Titan submersible this week, and
who did?
Whoever
was doing the investigation.
NTSB, I believe it was.
NTSB did an investigation.
I believe so.
Oh, jeez. But I guess there were passengers on board.
Yeah.
So that was again few years. Has to take the time to go get the sub and recover what they could for pictures and things. So there's definitely.
But that's not the norm for most investigators. That's not the kind of thing we're normally talking about here. For most of our customers that are doing investigations, most 99% of their investigations are not Deepwater Horizons and Titan submersibles. That's not.
Let's hope not.
That's right. That's just not what we're talking about. So for most of your investigations, anybody that's telling me that they have a 2-month deadline is they're not pushing hard enough at that point. They're letting things go too long to get things done, and then the learnings are taking that long before you can feed them back into your systems.
Yep.
So you're just begging for this to happen.
So
again.
I think timelines are, I think you said, a red herring, in that you need the time you need, but management needs the results to be able to put corrective actions in place to prevent bad things and to learn from this one. And if it takes you 3 years to get an investigation done, think of how many people are left and gone by the time you get it done, and how many people say, well, that was back then. Today, we're totally different. Yep. So this isn't applied today. So it really is. I think if you've got a good organization, they know they have to produce it, I'll say quickly, but not so quickly that you don't collect information, don't do good root cause analysis, don't find out what happened.
So I think we've established a good general rule, which is it can't be so quick that we're missing evidence and we're not spending the appropriate time to actually understand. And then it can't be so long that the corrective actions are either irrelevant to the industry now, or it's been so long that the impact of learning isn't as important. Right. So there has to be, there's
and
a level of that.
That's probably that world class type of investigation.
So
we've
made this thing all about time, which is one of the minor points.
Yeah. So let's say we have the support. We're spending the appropriate amount of time. What are we spending our time on in the investigation that makes it world class?
I think most of our time is that I found for most investigations is gathering data. That's where most of your time is. And if you're going to take 10 minutes to gather data, you're not gathering any data. That's not an investigation. That's just throwing your ideas out there. Evidence collection is 70% of your time in most cases for investigation.
I would say even more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, it's, a really world-class investigation really has a clear understanding of what happened. It really helps you understand all the little things that happened along this timeline of events.
What now?
Yeah. So it's not. I mean, I've seen investigations where I read the report and I go, I still don't understand the actual what happened here. I can see what they're doing, but I don't understand how all of this connects. I don't see the picture. I don't understand the story.
Well, that may be because they were covering up what happened, and therefore they didn't want to tell you what happened. They wanted to jump to their corrective actions, which they already had developed.
So you have to have a clear timeline of what happened. For TapRooT, that's making a SnapCharT, which makes it visual. What else do you need to understand about an incident to help you be world class? Is it just having a timeline, or is there more to it?
Well, that timeline, first of all, has to be evidence-based. It's not just something you think happened. It's got to be something you can prove. Once you have that evidence and once you have that timeline, you're going to have to try to understand the reasons that things happened in there and why a mistake was made or why something wasn't done the way it was supposed to be. And just having that in the timeline isn't necessarily enough.
And saying that, you mentioned things that happened or things that went wrong. Those are causal factors. Those are the things you're trying to explain with root cause analysis. So you need to know what happened. You need to pick out the problems that caused this thing to go wrong. And a lot of people talk a lot about having a, what's it called? What we call the circle on our diagram is the bad outcome. Yeah. But they start talking about developing
problem statements.
A problem statement, which drives me nuts. We know what the problem is. That's what we're investigating. And so they make a problem statement that's either so tight or so loose. So loose is pretty much what we start off with. Your problem statement is, we're investigating this fatality that we had, where they may, the one that kills me is the Deepwater Horizon one, where they said, okay, this is the internal investigation. You can do an investigation, but I only want to know about the direct causes. In other words, don't bring me any management system causes. Those aren't direct. Just the direct causes.
Just told me that the pipe, the cement was bad. Just tell me that. That's all I want to know, right?
And
I want to know that physical equipment failure. That's where we're going to stop at.
Well, as long as it's in our physical, you had somebody else's.
Somebody else's equipment, right? Yeah.
So since they were hiring everything, that was pretty safe, and that's one of those things that you say, well, that was another example of management steering the investigation because they were worried about liability. And worried about liability is not going to get you a good investigation. If you're worried about liability, do it under attorney-client privilege, although today there's lots of regulatory requirements for investigations, so you may be out of luck with that. But it's a possibility at least. And what management should be worried about is stopping repeats, improving performance, and really doing smaller investigations, which we're talking here like every investigation is
a Deepwater Horizon,
a big explosion, a big fire, multiple fatalities. You want to prevent those, so you want to be investigating the small precursor incidents, and you ought to be putting your effort into those investigations to prevent the bigger investigations. And I know there's tons of people who say, oh, the pyramid theory, it doesn't exist, blah, 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 blah. Well, maybe the pyramid theory doesn't exist the way it was modernly proposed, but the guy who built the pyramid didn't say it had to be that way. What he said is precursors, or the little things, were precursors to the big things. And so when everybody says, well, you're wasting your time investigating small incidents, well, not if they're precursors to something bigger. And so what you're judging is, could have this caused a major accident? Could have this caused a major injury? Could have this caused a fatality? And if that's true, you ought to be putting the same kind of effort into that investigation as you would a major investigation, because you're trying to prevent a major investigation. You want to be the company who never has a major investigation.
So getting back onto the point between the difference between a, we'll say, introductory level investigation and a world-class one, we kind of come in on the causal factor element and the evidence collection here. And I think I've seen people struggle to get to that next level because they identify a causal factor and they think they're done with the evidence collection.
Well, that's because if the causal factor is some human error, somebody did something wrong, what are we going to do to fix that?
Fix the person.
Fix the person, fire the person. That's the ultimate fix there. Well, hey, what happened again? We fired him. And that happens in major incidents.
Yeah. So I think when people think we're stopping an investigation at causal factors, that's where they miss. Really, once I've identified causal factors, that's where I start to really ask the right questions, because I can look at the context behind their action. I can look at things like equipment setup, rules, procedures, what are our standards, how has management been communicating about those standards, all of these things that help us better understand the decisions that were made, the actions that were taken, the things that occurred in this incident. So I think what makes one of the biggest differences between kind of an entry-level investigation or world-class is really how they treat evidence collection and documentation once they've identified causal factors. If you're putting in the right information, say on your SnapCharT, you're really going to see the difference between an experienced investigator analyzing causal factors versus maybe a newer person analyzing them, making sure they're documenting that evidence, making sure they're linking that evidence properly to where it's most relevant in your SnapCharT. And I think that's something that comes with experience and time, is looking at how you link that, how you document it.
I think that a lot of times people think they're going to figure out what was going through somebody's mind when they did something. And you're never going to figure that out. And first off, the guy's under tremendous pressure to tell you a story, not necessarily the truth. And so what you're looking for is the what happened, like you said, the what went wrong, that's the causal factors, and there's probably more than one of those. And then what do we know about good practices that should have prevented that could have made that performance different? No matter what was going through that person's mind, he's thinking about the steak he was going to have for dinner or whatever. What good practices should we had in place that would have prevented this from occurring, which then gets to the backside of the root cause tree and the best practices to improve human performance. And that's going to be the outcome of your investigation, the corrective actions you're going to recommend. And if this is common problems, they're then going to be generic causes you're going to look at. You're going to look at systemic fixes that you can eliminate this type of problem all across your facility. And coming up with good corrective actions for systemic and specific problems is, I think, almost the definition of what is a world-class investigation. Because I don't care how much information you collect. I don't care what it is. If you don't have good corrective actions at the end, you've wasted your time. And I don't think you can get good corrective actions with having all that stuff to start with. So it's not that that's worthless and corrective actions is the whole thing. It's like it adds up to an outcome.
Your whole goal on an investigation is to fix stuff. And if you have crappy corrective actions, you've just wasted the rest of your investigation. So the corrective action piece is really critical.
And you've wasted your opportunity to fix things, which, if this is a precursor incident, you've wasted your opportunity to prevent a bigger accident. And that's where we get these big accidents that happen. They wasted their opportunities, and they didn't fix problems that could cause major accidents, and therefore they were just left these traps existing that finally caught them.
You can watch all the time when people finish up these investigations, major ones, and they'll go through and they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's been like that for a long time. Oh yeah, we knew about that. Oh, I thought we fixed that." Those are things you see on almost all investigations, all these precursors that were just sitting there all the time, and it's very common in major investigations to, in hindsight, say, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing that."
So you mentioned on here there, and I think this is important to circle back on again too. World class means you have both corrective and preventive. You have things that are correcting specific problems that you find in this investigation, but you also have this preventive mindset of, hey, we're looking for these generic issues. We're looking for something systemic that can be applied not just to this one specific instance, which I think is where people get all about the Heinrich pyramid, the fact of, oh, well, this was just one unique set of circumstances. Well, if we're only focusing on the narrow, we miss that broader context of how we can apply that best practice. And I think, again, a world-class investigation looks not just at this narrow thing we have to correct, but also looks at that broader application of how we can prevent that incident in other similar circumstances, which we probably have more of in our organization.
So the balancing efforts you got to do is not go crazy over minor stuff, so that you're saying we need to change our whole plant, our whole management system, everything we do.
Because somebody got paper cut.
Well, paper cut probably would never become a fatality, but let's say it was, they almost got crushed by a load. Well, they admit it didn't happen, but it could have. And you say, well, what is the reasonable response to this? And the reasonable response is to make sure nobody else gets crushed by a load, as opposed to the reasonable response being, let's change all our management and everything so that no other hazard can ever happen again, which is probably overdoing it.
And you do see that a lot when it talks about kind of for precursor, the speculative, what could have happened. People can sometimes, well, they could have slipped and tripped and fell down these, and we look for everywhere with stairs now. And you're like, okay, but what was the real incident that we're trying to look at? It wasn't a slip or trip. And yes, they are kind of standing at an area that could have stairs, but let's be specific to this. This was really a crane in.
So it's a matter of
it's balanced.
Doing enough, but not going overboard. People do that in investigations too. They all of a sudden you see them. Every little tiny problem they see becomes a causal factor, and all of a sudden they go crazy on the root cause tree, and they select the whole backside of the tree needs to be fixed. They go circle happy, I call it. And the next thing you know, it's like, oh, there's 43 recommendations. Oh, there's no, management's going to just die when you present that to them. 43, there's no way we're ever going to get 43 done. And so instead of getting 6 important things done, and maybe we'll get to some of these littler ones later, you don't get anything done.
Yeah.
Now, I think as important as having good corrective actions, there's almost something that you have to also be able to do in order to have a world class, which is being able to actually report out so that people can understand and know what action needs to be taken. Kind of what you're talking about for corrective actions.
Almost say convince them.
Yeah, you have to convince them. It's not just, oh, here's a bunch of corrective actions. I'm sure they'll just magically agree with me.
Yeah, they do. That's what happens.
It's just that management just agrees with my wonderful report. Presenting out an investigation can often be as tricky as actually performing it to get people, the right people in the room. One of the things we talked about in our 5-day course is not surprising people or making sure you know the hot button issues of people in the room so that you're, almost playing a game of politics in here, but you're being political in how you're presenting it so that you're getting people more likely to support you, less likely to oppose you. And I think that's a game you have to play.
You can think of it kind of a game, but it's also a salesmanship kind of thing. You're trying to tell people in your management team why it's important. They may not see that off the top of their head, why this piece of this corrective action is really important. And if you don't properly sell it, if you don't properly explain it, then management just doesn't realize the importance of that piece of it sometimes. So that's all part of it, is reporting out and doing I hate using the word salesmanship because it sounds phony, but it's properly explaining it and understanding the consequences of either doing something or not doing something.
Yeah.
And back to management support, the That's also all I'm going to talk about this time. It's hard when people have already presumed an answer. They've already jumped to conclusions, and then you've got to go in and present what happens. And even if you've been doing a good job of presenting them a little bit at a time so they follow you along, they can say, no, that's not right. This guy just screwed up. And if that's their answer, if they start off with the wrong vision, and they've got the blame vision, and if you read the
Book one,
you talk about the blame vision, the crisis vision, and the opportunity to improve vision. The crisis vision is probably easier to convince somebody than the blame vision is, because the blame vision, they've already decided somebody's to blame for this, and if you come to them with, no, there really wasn't that person to blame, there's some management system fixes we need to make here, they're going to go, wait a second, where's personal accountability? And that could become a very difficult conversation to have in a presentation.
You say that, but the crisis management vision, they stopped listening once you told them it was operational again.
That's true. That's true.
So I think some other things for presenting out findings, we have clients that are doing this. They take the information they collected with the SnapCharT. They've got that really good timeline of what happened, and that enables them to use AI tools that they can make basically videos of these, where what used to take the CSB millions of dollars in years, which is one of the things that takes them years, is to make these big fancy videos. Well, now with AI, you can make videos for this investigation and present out those findings and those lessons learned. And I think the ability to take your investigation and turn it into something for lessons learned, to share in an organization, I think that's equally as valuable for making it world-class, is being able to actually share it to others.
There's different levels of the sharing, right? There's the technical, here's the report of all the data, and here it all is, but there's also, the little one-pager kind of thing that's put up on the bulletin board. Here's our quick things I need everybody to be thinking about. And there's you can do all these different types of reports simultaneously. You can have that really detailed one that goes to the management team and leadership team, and they get that. You can put the bulletin board one up there that everybody can take a quick look at as an email format that you'll send out as a PDF to everybody so they can all see it in their emails real quick. All these might be slightly different formats, and as long as your system can quickly format a report, those are all good things to do to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Let me go back to corrective actions again. You're probably trying to convince middle to upper management that they need to implement these corrective actions. But implementing corrective actions usually requires change from middle management to the workers in the field. And so you really have to convince them also to change and that this is worthwhile to implement. Otherwise, you're likely to get here we go again.
Another one.
This will go away. If we just wait long enough, this will go away. We really don't have to change. And I've seen this happen for real, where they had to fire plant managers to make change happen because the plant managers were just resisting the change because sooner or later it's going to go back to the way it was, and they didn't believe it. And upper level management was convinced, but they couldn't get middle management convinced. And then once middle management wasn't convinced, the guys on the shop floor, they weren't going to hear the story and change just because some top leader someplace said something. If the middle management was saying, "No worry about it, we're going to handle this," and so they had to actually fire people in that mid-level management realm to make change happen.
And I think the communication of why change needs to occur definitely is not carried down through an organization very well. We might communicate to upper level leadership, and there's maybe an assumptive that they get this information and understand why, and they can connect it. But then that communication to the next level down, like you're saying, this doesn't occur. Communication of why.
Everybody loves change as long as I don't have to change.
Somebody else has changed.
If it's
right?
Senior management, as long as I don't have to change and it's them, that's
That's
good.
right.
If it's
Go ahead
middle
and change.
management, if it's those lower guys, yeah, it's those senior guys. As long as it's not me, that's all well and good.
Yep.
So having a world-class investigation, you've got to have the management support to be able to have the right amount of resources, time, and training to do it correctly. You need to have the information and understand what happened, gather those facts.
Before that, training to use the system to do that.
Yep. So you have to understand what happened, have that information gathered, identify those causal factors, where things went wrong, have that evidence and information, looking for best practices that could have been put in place or failed, taking those to create better corrective actions, and then being able to communicate that well. That's really what goes into making a world-class investigation process.
And a systematic process of doing all that.
That does all that. Yeah.
Well,
Ties it all
if
together
they
for
need
you.
a systematic process that does all that, and they're going to be doing major investigations, where do they need to go for resources?
If they're going to do precursor investigations to prevent major investigations,
Where do they need to go for that?
they need to go one of our courses.
Which course?
Well, I'd suggest always the 5-day course is the first one you ought to consider. But if you don't have much time, the 2-day course is better than a no-day course.
2 days better than no days. So 5 days is our major investigation course. You can find the links for those courses and information down below. And best place right there is go to training or check out more of our videos. But training's going to be your best case.
Well, and they get to pick a great place, the location to go to take this training.
Yep. So see those links below, and we'll catch you at the next TapRooT podcast.